It was a bitterly cold evening in late February, the kind where the wind slices through every layer of clothing. After finishing a long and exhausting shift at the diner where I worked as a waitress, I was ready to head home to the tiny apartment I rented just outside of Springfield. The hours had been grueling, as they always were, but the solitude of the drive home was something I usually appreciated. That night, however, my car's dashboard lit up with the dreaded low fuel warning. I cursed under my breath, realizing I hadn't stopped for gas earlier, and with no other options in the sleepy town, I pulled into the first gas station I spotted. The place looked like it had been forgotten by time, rusted pumps, faded signage, and only a single flickering bulb offering light. Still, it was open, and that was all I needed. I parked by the closest pump and stepped out, wincing as the icy wind stung my face. As I reached for the nozzle, a man emerged from the shadows near the station's small, dimly lit building. He was tall, clean-cut, and dressed in a pristine uniform that seemed almost too polished for such a rundown location. For a split second, I was relieved, assuming he was an employee, but the overly wide smile he wore set me on edge. "Evening, miss," he said, his tone cheerful but overly practiced. "Need a hand with that?" "No, thanks," I replied briskly, focusing on the pump and trying to keep my voice steady. Something about him felt off. His clothes were immaculate, his hands free of grime, details that didn't quite fit the grimy backdrop of the old gas station. He didn't leave. Instead, he lingered a few feet away, watching me with that unsettling smile. When the nozzle clicked, signaling that my tank was full, he stepped closer. "You sure?" he asked, his tone insistent. "I could check your oil for you, no charge. Won't take more than a minute." I shook my head, trying to maintain composure. "I'm fine, really." "Thanks, though," I said, keeping my voice as firm as I could. Still, he didn't budge. His eyes darted to my car's hood, then to the trunk. "It's just that, your car sounds like it's running a little rough. You wouldn't want to break down on a night like this," he added, his voice dripping with false concern. The knot in my stomach tightened. I muttered something about needing to get home, replacing the gas cap as quickly as my shaking hands allowed. But before I could step back into the driver's seat, he moved closer, too close. "I'll just pop the hood and take a quick look," he said, reaching toward the front of the car. "No," I snapped, stepping back instinctively. "I'm fine, really." For a moment, he froze, his hand hovering midair. His smile returned, but this time, it didn't feel like an attempt to be friendly. It felt calculated. I noticed his other hand slipped into his pocket, and my pulse quickened. Whatever he was planning, I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Without hesitation, I yanked open the car door, jumped inside, and locked it in one swift motion. He didn't shout or try to stop me, but as I glanced through the window, I saw him casually walking toward the driver's side of my car. His hand was still buried in his pocket, and his expression remained disturbingly calm. I fumbled to start the engine, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as the car roared to life, I threw it into reverse, the tires screeching against the gravel as I backed up so fast I nearly hit a trash can. Without waiting another second, I shifted into drive and sped off, not even pausing to put on my seatbelt until I was halfway down the road. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I drove. My rearview mirror reflected the eerie sight of him standing under the station's flickering light, his silhouette unnervingly still. He wasn't running after me. He wasn't shouting. He was just standing there, watching me with that same eerie smile. The drive home felt like the longest of my life. Every car that passed, every shadow on the road, sent my mind racing with paranoia. I couldn't stop glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights tailing me. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my small apartment building, I parked and sat there for a moment, trying to collect myself. The house felt too quiet, too still, but I forced myself to go inside, locking every door and window behind me. Even the ones I normally didn't bother with. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake in bed, replaying the encounter over and over in my mind. Was I overreacting? Maybe he really was just trying to help. But the image of his too clean uniform and that unsettling grin wouldn't leave my head. The next day at work, I mentioned what had happened to a coworker during our lunch break. She listened intently, her expression growing more concerned as I spoke. "Trust your gut," she said firmly. "If something didn't feel right, it probably wasn't." 2 days later, during a quick coffee break, I was scrolling through news updates on my phone when a headline made me freeze. Man posing as gas station attendant wanted in connection with abduction. My heart sank as I clicked on the article, my hands shaking as I read. The description matched him exactly, down to the spotless uniform and overly friendly demeanor. According to the report, he had approached a woman at another gas station not far from where I had been, offering to help with her car. Unlike me, she had accepted. Her abandoned vehicle was found the next morning in the middle of a desert, but there was no sign of her. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized how close I had come to being his next victim. That same day, after my shift ended, I drove straight to the local police station. Sitting down with an officer, I recounted every detail I could remember, his appearance, his behavior, and the location of the gas station. The officer took notes and assured me they would look into it, but even that didn't bring much comfort. The following nights were restless. I kept replaying the what-ifs in my mind. What if I hadn't trusted my instincts? What if I had let him open the hood or check the trunk? The possibilities were terrifying. Since then, I've made a strict rule for myself: no more stopping at questionable gas stations, no matter how low my fuel tank gets. I even keep a small gas canister in my trunk for emergencies. The memory of that night lingers, a constant reminder of how quickly an ordinary moment can turn into something far more dangerous. Trusting my instincts saved me that night, and I'll never ignore them again. Spring break of April 2023 found me cruising through Tuscaloosa, Alabama, seeking some much-needed escape from the grind of graduate school. At 28, I was juggling deadlines, exams, and term papers, and this solo road trip was my way of hitting the reset button. My plan was loose: just me, my car, and the open road, with my favorite playlists for company and a promise to follow wherever curiosity took me. Hours of driving had passed uneventfully, but my body began to ache from sitting so long, and I realized it was time for a quick break. The urge to find a restroom became increasingly pressing, and I started scanning the roadside for options. That's when I spotted a small, forgotten-looking gas station just off the highway. It wasn't much to look at. Its weather-beaten sign hung at an awkward angle, and the pumps looked like they hadn't been upgraded in decades. An old, faded Honda sat off to the side, the only other car in the lot. The place exuded an eerie sort of quiet that made my stomach clench, but nature was calling, and I didn't have the luxury of being picky. Parking near the entrance, I stepped out of my car into the sticky heat of the afternoon, the stillness around me amplifying the unease. Inside, the gas station wasn't much better. The faint hum of overhead fluorescent lights provided the only sound, and the narrow aisles were cluttered with dusty snacks and faded soda bottles. The air smelled of stale coffee mixed with the sharp tang of industrial cleaner, though the faint scent of something damp lingered beneath. Behind the counter sat an elderly man, thick glasses perched on his nose as he buried himself in an ancient newspaper. He didn't look up as I entered, his disinterest matching the dreary surroundings. "Excuse me, where's the restroom?" I asked, breaking the silence. Without glancing up, he lazily pointed toward a dim hallway at the back of the store. His indifferent attitude unsettled me, but I brushed it off and headed in the direction he indicated. The bathroom door was painted a faded blue, its surface scarred with scratches and patches of peeling paint. I pushed it open, stepping into a space that somehow felt even more neglected than the rest of the station. Cracked tiles lined the floor, the walls were stained and grimy, and the single bulb overhead flickered faintly. A rusted sink sat beneath a mirror so filthy it barely reflected anything at all. The sight made me hesitate for a moment, but I reminded myself this wasn't a pit stop for luxury, it was a necessity. After handling my business, I approached the sink to wash my hands, the faucet sputtering weakly before releasing a thin stream of water. The paper towel dispenser let out a wheeze as I tugged at it, and I dried my hands as best I could. Ready to leave, I reached for the door handle, only to find that it wouldn't budge. Frowning, I tried again, twisting and pulling harder this time. Nothing. The handle didn't so much as wiggle. Confused, I crouched to inspect the lock, assuming it was old and jammed. I jiggled it a few more times, trying to force it loose, but the door wouldn't move an inch. "Hello?" I called out, knocking on the door. My voice echoed in the small, grimy space. The door is stuck. Can someone help me? The silence that followed felt heavier than before, pressing down on my chest. I knocked louder, this time shouting, "Hey! I'm locked in here." My words bounced off the tiled walls, amplifying the sound of my growing frustration. That's when I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the other side of the door. Relief surged through me, and I exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank God," I muttered under my breath, pressing my ear against the door. "I'm locked in here. Can you open the door?" I called, my voice carrying a hint of desperation now. But the footsteps stopped, and there was no reply. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded as I strained to hear any movement, but whoever, or whatever, was out there made no sound. "Hello?" I tried again, my voice faltering slightly. Still nothing. Just as panic began to creep in, the footsteps resumed, but this time, they were moving away. Fading. The knot in my stomach tightened as I stepped back from the door, the weight of the moment sinking in. Why hadn't they responded? Why hadn't they opened the door? I banged on the door again, this time with more urgency. My fists collided with the wood, the sound reverberating through the bathroom. "Hey! Someone!" I yelled, my voice cracking slightly. Minutes dragged by with no response, no sign of movement, and no explanation for what had just happened. My thoughts began to race, running through every possible scenario. Was this some kind of cruel prank? Had the attendant locked me in by mistake? Or was it something worse? Just as I was on the brink of full-blown panic, the door creaked open. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as the elderly man from behind the counter appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of irritation and confusion. "What's all the racket about?" he grumbled, his voice gruff. I stared at him in disbelief, my chest heaving. The door was locked. I couldn't get out. I snapped, frustration and fear boiling over. He blinked at me, then gave a dismissive shrug. "Locked? That door doesn't even lock from the outside." "Must have been stuck," he said, as though the explanation was simple and obvious. "I've been banging on it for ages," I shot back, but he didn't seem to care. "Well, it's open now," he said flatly, turning to shuffle back toward the front of the store. Something about his nonchalant attitude made my skin crawl, but I didn't stick around to argue. Muttering a quick thanks, I bolted past him and headed for the exit. My nerves were frayed, and all I wanted was to be back on the open road, as far away from that unsettling gas station as possible. As I reached my car, I glanced over my shoulder toward the building one last time. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure standing near the side of the station, partially obscured by the dim light. My breath hitched as I froze, my eyes locked on the silhouette. It didn't move, didn't say anything. It just stood there, watching. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled to unlock my car, throwing myself inside and locking the doors in one swift motion. My hands shook as I started the engine, stealing one last glance toward the figure. It hadn't moved. I didn't wait to find out who, or what, it was. Gravel sprayed beneath my tires as I sped out of the lot and back onto the highway, my pulse thundering in my ears. Even miles down the road, my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. When I finally reached my hotel that night, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. But sleep didn't come easily. The memory of those footsteps, the silence, and the motionless figure lingered, haunting my thoughts long into the night. The silence on the other side of the door felt oppressive, and despite my growing worry, I tried to stay rational. Maybe the lock was just old and jammed, or perhaps the attendant hadn't heard me. Summoning a calm I didn't quite feel, I knocked again, this time louder, calling out, "Hey! I'm stuck in here. Can someone help me?" My voice echoed in the cramped space, but no response came. Then, faintly, I heard it, footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, approaching from beyond the door. Relief flickered to life in my chest, and I pressed my ear closer, hoping for the sound of a key or even a simple acknowledgement. "Hello? I'm locked in here. Can you open the door?" I called, this time more urgently. But the footsteps stopped abruptly. No rattling keys, no voice, no attempt to open the door, just an unsettling silence. My breath hitched as I stood frozen, acutely aware of the tense stillness that seemed to stretch between me and whoever, or whatever, was on the other side. The feeling wasn't just silence, it was presence, an unmistakable awareness that I wasn't alone. I knocked again, softer this time, my voice faltering as I asked, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The stillness persisted for another agonizing moment before the footsteps resumed. Only now, they were retreating. Fading. Each step away felt like a tether pulling tighter around my chest. My relief from hearing someone had been short-lived, replaced by a creeping dread. Why hadn't they responded? Why hadn't they helped? Desperation clawed at me as I pounded on the door, my fists echoing loudly against the wood. "Hey! Please, can someone open this door?" I shouted, my voice breaking under the strain of rising panic. The minutes dragged like hours as I strained to hear anything, footsteps returning, a creak of the door, but the silence was unyielding. Alone in the dingy restroom, my thoughts spiraled into every terrifying possibility. Was this some cruel prank? Had the attendant locked me in deliberately? Or was it something far worse? I was just about to succumb to panic when the door finally creaked open, making me stumble back in surprise. The elderly man from the front counter stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of irritation and indifference. "What's all the commotion about?" he asked, his voice gravelly and annoyed, as though I'd disturbed his quiet evening. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. The door was locked, I finally managed, my voice tinged with disbelief and frustration. "I've been stuck in here, banging on it for ages." The man gave me a skeptical look, adjusting his thick glasses. "Locked? That door doesn't lock from the outside," he replied dismissively, as though I'd just accused the sink of turning off the lights. "Probably just got stuck. Happens sometimes." I stared at him, incredulous. "I'm telling you, I couldn't get it open," I insisted, but his shrug said everything. It was clear he didn't care. "Well, it's open now," he said flatly, stepping aside as if to let me leave and end the conversation. Something about his nonchalant demeanor sent a chill down my spine, but I wasn't about to stick around and argue. Muttering a rushed thanks, I brushed past him and made my way back toward the store's entrance. My pulse was still racing, and the dim fluorescent lights overhead only heightened my unease. I couldn't stop myself from glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something, or someone, to appear behind me. As I stepped into the parking lot, I instinctively scanned my surroundings. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing near the side of the gas station, barely illuminated by the dim exterior lights. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, my eyes locked on the silhouette. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. My legs felt rooted to the spot, but instinct screamed at me to move. Fumbling with my keys, I hurried to unlock my car, my fingers trembling as I climbed inside and slammed the door shut. The locks clicked into place, and I started the engine with shaking hands. A quick glance back toward the building revealed the figure hadn't moved an inch, but I didn't wait to find out who, or what, it was. Gravel crunched under my tires as I sped out of the lot, my headlights cutting through the encroaching darkness. Even as I merged back onto the highway, my heart refused to settle. I kept stealing glances at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. The road stretched out before me, but the unease clung to me like a shadow. By the time I reached my hotel that night, I was emotionally and physically drained. I locked the door the moment I stepped inside, even wedging a chair under the handle for extra security. Sleep, however, didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing motionless in the shadows. The memory of those slow, deliberate footsteps in the suffocating silence played on a loop in my mind, gnawing at my nerves. Questions swirled endlessly. Who had been outside that door? Why hadn't they responded? And what had they been waiting for? The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering unease and continue my trip. But as I loaded up my car, paranoia gripped me. Every passerby seemed to linger a little too long, and every parked car felt suspiciously out of place. I pulled into a rest stop just to clear my head, sipping my coffee and staring into its swirling depths as though they might hold the answers I was seeking. Later that day, I stopped at a larger, busier gas station to refuel. The bright lights and bustling atmosphere helped ease some of my tension, but I still couldn't fully relax. My eyes kept darting toward the exits, and every creak or shuffle of feet sounded louder than it should have. When the attendant asked if I was okay, I simply nodded and said I was tired from the road, though I doubted he believed me. Weeks after returning home, the memory of that night remained vivid, refusing to fade. I caught myself scouring the internet for news about Tuscaloosa gas stations, half hoping and half dreading to find a story that might explain what had happened. But there was nothing, no reports of break-ins, no crimes that matched the eerie scenario I'd experienced. Sometimes, it's the lack of answers that lingers the longest. I'll never know who, or what, was standing in the shadows that night. I'll never understand why the door had been locked or why the footsteps hadn't responded. Maybe it's better that way. One thing's certain, though, I'll never stop at a random, desolate gas station again. Some places, and some moments, are best left in the rearview mirror, where they can haunt you safely from a distance. The events of that night at the deserted gas station are etched into my memory, a sharp reminder of how swiftly an ordinary moment can spiral into something terrifying. It was September 2021, during a work trip to Asheville, North Carolina. As a 33-year-old accountant, I'd grown used to navigating unfamiliar places for my job. Yet, on this particular evening, every instinct I had was put to the ultimate test. After a grueling day of back-to-back meetings, I was desperate to reach my hotel and unwind. Unfortunately, my GPS decided to throw me a curveball, rerouting me onto an unfamiliar, winding road. The narrow, unlit path was surrounded by dense trees on either side, their shadows stretching endlessly into the night. My headlights carved out a faint tunnel of visibility, but the darkness beyond felt stifling, almost alive. With no streetlights to guide the way, the isolation wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Each turn in the road seemed to deepen my unease, revealing more of the same eerie, unyielding forest. Then, as if to compound my anxiety, the low fuel warning on my dashboard chimed, breaking the oppressive silence inside my car. My gas tank was running dangerously low, and there wasn't a single sign of civilization in sight. The tight knot of worry in my stomach grew with every mile, the minutes stretching longer with each passing second. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was racing against an invisible clock, each turn of my tires a countdown to being stranded in the middle of nowhere. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, a gas station appeared as though conjured from the shadows. Its faded exterior and peeling paint spoke of years of neglect, while the neon sign above flickered weakly, casting sporadic light over the lot. The building was small, almost shack-like, with a single dim bulb illuminating the entrance. Everything about it screamed turn around, but I didn't have the luxury of being choosy. Relieved to have at least found fuel, I pulled into the lot and parked at the closest pump. The lot was empty save for an old, battered truck parked near the side of the building. Its dark windows gave away nothing, and I couldn't tell if it was occupied. As I stepped out of my car, the cold air bit at my skin, adding to the growing chill running down my spine. Before I could even process the silence, the station door creaked open. A man emerged, his figure silhouetted against the dim light spilling from inside. He was wearing a faded, stained uniform, his wide grin cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Evening, ma'am," he called out, his overly cheerful tone grating against the eerie atmosphere. "Hi," I replied cautiously, forcing a polite nod as I kept my voice neutral. Something about him felt wrong. His smile was too forced, his demeanor too eager. Still, I had no choice but to get gas, so I grabbed my card and turned toward the pump. "Need help with that?" he asked, stepping closer. "These old pumps can be a bit tricky." His grin never faltered, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Thanks, but I've got it," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. He hesitated for a moment before stepping back, though his watchful gaze never left me. I swiped my card and tried to start the pump, but nothing happened. Frowning, I tried again, but the pump remained lifeless. "Looks like it's acting up," he said, his grin widening unnaturally. "Why don't you come inside? We can sort it out at the register." Every instinct in me screamed not to go inside. "I'll just try another pump," I said quickly, moving to the next one. But the result was the same. The man followed me, his presence growing more intrusive with each step. Sometimes they're all like this, he said casually, his voice oozing false reassurance. Could be your car. Want me to take a quick look? Might just be a connection issue. No, that's okay, I replied, my voice wavering slightly as I struggled to maintain composure. My eyes darted around the lot, searching for any signs of life, any indication that I wasn't alone with this unsettling man. But there was nothing. The truck parked near the building looked abandoned, its windows impossibly dark. The thought crossed my mind that someone could be watching me from inside, and the idea made my skin crawl. It'll only take a second, he insisted, stepping closer again. Pop the hood, and I'll have it fixed in no time. His persistence sent a fresh wave of panic through me, but I forced a tight smile. Sure, I said, my voice barely steady. Let me just move the car closer to the building. As I climbed into my car, my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out my thoughts. I locked the doors, my fingers trembling as I started the engine. His grin faltered for the first time as he realized what I was doing. Without hesitation, I threw the car into reverse, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him sprinting after me, something shiny clutched in his hand. My stomach churned as I pressed harder on the gas, my only focus on putting as much distance as possible between myself and that gas station. Several miles down the road, I finally reached a well-lit intersection and pulled into a larger, busier gas station. My hands were still trembling as I parked, the bright lights and presence of other people offering a sliver of comfort. As I filled my tank, I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. What had he been holding? What would have happened if I had let him get closer? The questions gnawed at me, their answers too terrifying to consider. Later that night, safely in my hotel room, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle, desperate for any semblance of security. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that forced grin, and the way he had sprinted toward my car. The memory of the shiny object in his hand haunted me, a reminder of how close I'd come to danger. The next morning, I shared the story with my husband, a police officer with a knack for spotting danger. His reaction was a mix of worry and frustration. You should have called me immediately, he said, his voice firm but laced with concern. That guy could still be out there, doing the same thing to someone else. At his urging, I reported the incident to the local authorities, providing every detail I could remember, the man's appearance, the truck, and the exact location of the station. A few hours later, my husband called with an update. The station's pumps weren't even connected to the system, he said. They've been shut off for months. Whoever that guy was, he had no reason to be there. The revelation sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Whoever he was, his intentions were far from innocent. These days, I make sure my gas tank is full before any road trip, and I avoid stopping at isolated stations altogether. The memory of that night serves as a constant reminder, trust your instincts. They might just save your life. The dim glow of the gas station lights cast eerie, uneven shadows as I pulled into the empty lot. Gravel crunched under the weight of my delivery truck, echoing in the stillness of the night. The building ahead was unremarkable, an aging structure with a neon sign struggling to stay lit. I parked near the pump and stepped out, shivering as the frigid November air bit through my jacket. My boots scuffed against the gravel as I made my way toward the store, the weight of exhaustion from a full day of deliveries pressing down on me. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, amplifying the unnerving silence that hung heavy in the air. The creak of the door as I pushed it open startled me, its sound cutting through the quiet like a warning bell. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, illuminating shelves stocked with dusty snacks and faded soda cans. The air was stale, tinged with the faint scent of cleaning chemicals that failed to mask something deeper, something sour. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor as I approached the counter, expecting someone to appear from the back. But the store was eerily empty. Hello? I called out, my voice reverberating in the silence. No answer. Unease prickled at the edges of my consciousness as I looked around. The cash register sat closed and untouched, and nothing seemed obviously out of place. Yet, something felt undeniably wrong. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a dark stain on the floor behind the counter, leading toward a door labeled Employees Only. At first, I told myself it could be anything, spilled soda, oil, or some other harmless mess. But as I moved closer, the stain's deep crimson hue became unmistakable. My stomach twisted as realization dawned. It was blood. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get back into my truck and drive away as fast as I could. But a mix of curiosity and concern rooted me in place. What if someone was hurt and needed help? My boots squeaked against the tiles as I inched closer to the door, the sound unbearably loud in the oppressive silence. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached for the handle, hesitating for a moment as dread clawed at the edges of my thoughts. What if whatever, or whoever, had caused that stain was still inside? My hand trembled as I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, the sound amplified in the confined space. The room beyond was dimly lit, a single bulb swinging slightly overhead, casting shifting shadows on the walls. The smell hit me first, metallic and sharp, mingled with the musty scent of old cardboard and cleaning supplies. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the cluttered shelves and the general disarray. And then I saw him. In the center of the room, a man was tied to a chair, his head slumped forward, his body eerily still. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was dead. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, but I forced myself to move closer. As I stepped into the room, the floor creaked under my weight, and his head twitched slightly. A low, pained groan escaped his lips, and relief flooded through me. He was alive. "Hey," I whispered, my voice shaky as I inched closer. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond, just let out another faint groan. His hands were bound tightly behind him, the ropes cutting into his skin, and there was duct tape over his mouth. Blood streaked his forehead, and his shirt was stained with it as well. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene before me. Who had done this to him? And were they still here? Panic surged through me as I realized how exposed I was. I needed to get help, and fast. "Hold on," I said, more to myself than to him. I stumbled back out of the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. Back in the store, I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. 911, what's your emergency? "There's a man here," I blurted, my words tumbling over each other. "He's tied up, there's blood, he's hurt. It's a gas station off Route 20, just past the old highway turnoff." "Stay on the line," the operator instructed. "Help is on the way." "Are you in immediate danger?" "I don't know," I admitted, glancing nervously toward the door. I didn't see anyone else, but I'm not sure. My voice faltered as the enormity of the situation hit me. What if whoever did this came back? I couldn't stay here. "I'll be outside, in my truck," I said quickly before hanging up. The icy air was a slap to the face as I bolted back to my vehicle. Locking the doors, I kept my eyes trained on the gas station entrance, my breath fogging up the windows as I scanned the lot for any sign of movement. Every second felt like an eternity, but finally, red and blue lights pierced the darkness. Relief washed over me as 2 police cars pulled into the lot. The officers approached cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the shadows as they entered the building. I watched from my truck, heart still racing, as they disappeared inside. Minutes later, one of them emerged, motioning for me to come out. I hesitated, then stepped out, the cold biting at my skin. "He's alive," the officer said, his tone serious but calm. "An ambulance is on the way. You did the right thing by calling." I nodded, too shaken to respond. Another officer stayed inside with the man, while the one speaking to me asked for a statement. I recounted everything, the empty store, the blood, the tied-up man. "Looks like a robbery gone wrong," the officer said grimly. "They probably knocked him out and tied him up so he couldn't call for help. Something must have scared them off before they could finish whatever they had planned." As the ambulance arrived and the medics tended to the injured man, I stood by my truck, trying to process what had just happened. The weight of it all hit me in waves, the blood, the eerie silence, the possibility that I could have walked into something far worse. What if I hadn't stopped at that station? Would anyone have found him in time? The thought made my chest tighten. The officers assured me they would continue investigating, but as I drove away, the unease lingered. Every shadow on the road seemed darker, every noise louder. That night, sleep was a distant hope. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man tied to the chair, the blood on the floor, and the empty store that had felt so suffocatingly wrong. Even now, months later, the memory hasn't faded. I've learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention when something doesn't feel right. Stopping at that gas station saved a man's life, but it also changed mine. Now, every time I pull into a station late at night, I think twice. You never know what might be waiting in the shadows, just out of sight. As his head shifted slightly, I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Hey," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond with words, just a faint, muffled groan. My stomach sank as I noticed the duct tape covering his mouth, his hands bound tightly behind the chair. Blood streaked across his forehead and stained his shirt, the deep red stark against the dim light in the room. My instincts screamed at me to act, to do something, but my body felt frozen in place for a moment, caught between fear and adrenaline. Finally, reality kicked in, and I turned on my heel, racing out of the room. Back in the store, I fumbled for my phone, my shaking hands making it difficult to unlock the screen. I dialed 911, my breath hitching as the operator's calm voice greeted me. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's a man tied up," I stammered, my words rushing out in a jumble. "At a gas station, Route 20, there's blood everywhere. He's hurt, and I paused, trying to catch my breath. "I think someone attacked him." "Stay calm," the operator instructed. "Help is on the way." "Are you safe right now?" "Safe?" I wasn't sure. My eyes darted around the store, scanning every corner for movement. I don't know," I admitted. "I'm alone in the store, but whoever did this could still be here." "Stay on the line," the operator said firmly, but the thought of lingering in that eerie building made my skin crawl. "I'll wait in my truck," I said quickly, hanging up before they could argue. I bolted for the exit, the door's loud creak echoing through the stillness as I stepped outside. The cold night air hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed as I sprinted to my truck. Locking the doors behind me, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. My eyes stayed fixed on the gas station's entrance, every shadow and flicker of movement sending waves of paranoia through me. I couldn't stop imagining someone bursting out of the building, coming after me, but the lot remained silent. Time stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity until, finally, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dark road. Relief flooded me as 2 police cars pulled into the lot. I jumped out of my truck, waving frantically to get their attention. "He's in the back," I said, my voice trembling. "There's blood, and he's tied up. I think he needs help." One officer nodded, motioning for me to stay near my truck as they approached the store cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. One had his hand resting on his holster, ready for anything. I watched as they disappeared inside, my nerves fraying with every passing second. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the occasional crackle of their radios. Finally, one officer emerged, his expression grim but composed. "An ambulance is on the way," he informed me. "You did the right thing by calling. It looks like someone tried to rob the place and didn't want to leave witnesses. They knocked him out and tied him up, but it seems something spooked him before they could go through with whatever they had planned." The weight of his words sank in slowly, leaving me feeling both relieved and horrified. "Will he be okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer nodded. "He's conscious, but he'll need medical attention. The medics should be here any minute." As the ambulance arrived, I stayed near my truck, watching as the paramedics wheeled the injured man out of the store. His face was pale, his movements sluggish, but he was alive. That thought alone brought a small measure of comfort. One of the officers approached me again, a notepad in hand. "We'll need you to give a statement," he said. I nodded, recounting everything, the empty store, the bloodstain, the moment I found the man tied to the chair. My voice wavered at times, the gravity of the situation settling in deeper with every word. Once my statement was complete, the officers thanked me and assured me they'd continue investigating. I climbed back into my truck, the exhaustion of the day catching up with me all at once. As I drove away, the events of the night replayed in my mind like a haunting reel. The image of the man tied up, the dark stain on the floor, the oppressive silence of the store, it all clung to me like a heavy fog. The drive home felt endless. Every shadow on the road seemed to shift, every noise felt amplified in the quiet of the night. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn off the engine. Inside, I double-checked every lock, even placing a chair under the door handle for added security. But even with those precautions, sleep didn't come easily. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that room again, the flickering bulb, the blood, the helpless man. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The officers told me the man was recovering and that they were investigating leads, but the what-ifs gnawed at me. What if I hadn't stopped at that station? Would anyone have found him in time? And what if whoever did this had been lurking nearby, waiting for me to stumble into their trap? Those questions haunted me long after that night, reshaping how I approached the mundane act of stopping for gas. I started avoiding isolated stations altogether, sticking to well-lit, populated areas even if it meant driving out of my way. The memory of that night became a constant reminder of how quickly an ordinary moment could shift into something sinister. Now, every time I'm on the road, I trust my instincts without hesitation. That night at the gas station taught me that gut feelings aren't just fleeting thoughts, they're warnings. And sometimes, they're the only thing standing between you and a nightmare you might not escape.